"Turn back, you little fool, the ford is gone," the carter bellowed from the bank, but Maren was already knee-deep in the rising black water, holding her basket of fever root above the flood, because the miller's child was burning up across the river, and there was no other road. The storm had come down out of the hills without warning, the way storms did in that country, and the gentle ford that any cart could cross by daylight was now a churning torrent in the dark, swollen brown and roaring, snatching at her skirts with cold hands. Maren set her jaw and went on. She had crossed worse. The child would die by morning without the root, and a healer did not turn back, because the way was hard. She was 3 steps from the far bank when the water took her feet from under her. The flood swallowed her whole. The cold of it drove the breath from her body, and the current spun her like a leaf, dragging her downstream toward the broken weir, where the river dropped white and deadly into the gorge below. She fought, she clawed at the dar, her basket gone, her cry lost in the roar. Her fingers found a branch and lost it. The weir thundered closer. Then a hand closed around her wrist like iron. She was hauled up half out of the water against something solid and warm and alive, a horse's heaving flank, a man's arm locked around her, and a voice at her ear low and fierce above the roar of the flood. "I have you. Do not fight me, I have you." She knew that voice, though she had only heard it once, from a respectful distance, on the day he rode through the village a year past, the War Duke of Ravenskar. The lord they whispered about, who had come home from the wars with a scar through his brow and a silence on him like a closed door, who lived alone in the great house on the cliff and saw no one. He had ridden his black horse straight into the killing flood after her in the dark, in the storm, and now he held her against death itself with an arm that did not so much as tremble. "The weir," she gasped, "the drop." "I see it." His arm tightened. Hold to me, and do not let go." The horse screamed and fought the current, hooves slipping on the drowned stones, and for one terrible moment they went sideways toward the white roar, and Maren felt the Duke shift his whole weight, heard him speak to the beast in a calm, hard voice that brooked no argument, and the great horse found its footing and lunged. They came up out of the flood onto the high bank in a rush of water and mud, and the roar fell away behind them, and Maren was shaking so hard she could not speak. The Duke swung down and lifted her from the saddle before she could fall, and he held her there in the streaming rain, this great brooding man, looking down into her face with an intensity that frightened her more than the river had. "You are hurt," he said. "No." Her teeth chattered. "Cold, only cold, your grace, the child, the miller's child, the fever root. I lost it in the water, I must." "You will go nowhere." His grip on her arms gentled even as his voice did not. "You nearly died this night for a basket of root. You will not throw the life I just pulled from that flood back into it." He looked at her, rain running down the scar through his dark brow, and something moved in his hard face. "Tell me what the child needs." "I will send 3 riders, and they will find it or buy it or take it from the apothecary's own shelf by morning. But you are coming with me out of this storm, before the cold finishes what the river could not." She wanted to argue. She had argued with everyone all her life. The village that thought a woman healer was half a witch, the men who told her where she might and might not go. But she was shaking too hard, and his cloak was already around her shoulders, heavy and warm and smelling of rain and leather, and his arm was around her again, steadying, as he lifted her back onto the horse and swung up behind her. He took her up the cliff road in the dark, the rain lashing, the sea booming far below, and he held her against his chest the whole way so that she should not fall, and Maren, who trusted no one, found herself leaning into the steady warmth of him, as though her body had decided the matter without consulting her at all. At the great house his servants flew into motion at his single word: a fire, dry clothes, broth. 3 riders went out into the storm with the names of the herbs the miller's child needed, and Maren, wrapped in a blanket before a roaring hearth, watched the Duke of Ravenskar give orders for a stranger's sick child as though it were the most natural thing in the world, and she did not understand him at all. "Why," she said at last, when the room had emptied and only the 2 of them remained, the fire snapping between them, "why did you come into the flood? You might have drowned. For a village herbalist you have never spoken to. The Duke stood at the hearth, his wet hair pushed back, the scar livid in the firelight, and for a long moment he did not answer. I have watched you for a year, he said finally. She went still. From the cliff, from the road, I do not go among people. I have seen enough of the world to prefer my own company. His dark eyes found hers and held. But I have watched you cross that valley in all weathers to sit with the dying and the poor who can pay you nothing. I have watched you carry your basket up to the cottages no one else will enter for fear of fever. I have watched you do, quietly and for no reward, the only kind of courage I have ever truly respected. I came home from the wars believing there was no goodness left in the world that was not paid for. His voice roughened. And then there was you, crossing the valley, asking nothing. The fire crackled. Maren's heart had begun to beat very strangely. Tonight I saw you go into that water, he said low, and I did not think. I have faced cannon and not felt fear as I felt it watching the flood take you. I would have ridden into the sea itself. Hika stepped toward her, and the great feared war Duke of Ravenscar, who saw no one and feared nothing, looked suddenly and entirely undefended. I have nothing pretty to offer you. I am scarred and I am silent, and I have forgotten how to be among people. But I have spent a year watching you from a distance, and I find I can no longer bear the distance. Stay. Not tonight only. Stay, and let me spend my life standing between you and every flood that ever comes. Maren rose from the blanket. She crossed the firelit room to where he stood, this brooding mountain of a man who had pulled her back from the weir's white edge, and she looked up into his ruined, hoping face, and she did the bravest thing she had done in a night already full of bravery. She lifted her hand and laid it against the scar on his brow. He went utterly still beneath her touch, as though no one had touched him kindly in a very long time. I have watched you too, she said softly. The lonely lord on the cliff that everyone fears. I always wondered what grief had taught a man to wall himself away so high above the world. Her thumb moved gently over the old wound. I think I should like very much to learn the rest of it. Something broke in his dark eyes, some long-held thing, and the War Duke of Ravenscar bowed his scarred head and pressed his brow against hers, and the two of them stood there in the firelight, while the storm hurled itself uselessly against the windows, and the cold and the distance and the long loneliness of both their lives drained slowly away into the warmth between them. The riders returned at dawn, the miller's child lived. And by midsummer the village that had whispered Maren was half a witch came in their Sunday best to the chapel on the cliff to see their herbalist married to the lord who had ridden into the flood for her, and the old women wept, and the young ones told the story for years after, of the night the walk of Ravenscar braved the killing river in the dark for the poor woman the world overlooked, and carried her up the cliff road through the storm and never let her go again as long as he lived. For he had faced the cannon and the flood and the long cold years of his own grief, and found that none of them had frightened him so much as the thought of a life without her in it. And so he had simply decided, with the whole stubborn will of a man who had survived everything, that there would never be one.